Well, hey everybody, West McDonald here, and welcome to another exciting YouTube video to help you better your business on TigerTube. I'm really excited today to have Jason Bystrak in from D&H Distributing. And one of the things that we've noticed really taking flight, it's kind of a pun that I'm making there, is the growth of the cloud and the opportunities that are there for people that are looking for it. But it's certainly a confusing space. And certainly there's a lot of expertise out there to help us navigate what that really means as an opportunity to make sure that it becomes less cloudy, if you will. So Jason, as I like to do in these things, I don't want to introduce you. You know yourself better than anybody. So maybe you could tell me a little bit about yourself professionally and add one interesting thing about yourself that maybe people don't know.
Yeah, sounds good, Wes. Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me today. It's good to catch up with you again. As you said, my name is Jason Bystrak, and I'm currently the Vice President of the Cloud and Services Business Unit at D&H Distributing. For those that aren't familiar with D&H, we're actually a 104-year-old company, been around for a long time. So as we said, this isn't even our first pandemic that we've been through. But we really specialize in selling IT products and solutions to SMB partners who serve the SMB market.
So let's maybe narrow down just into the opportunity at hand. I do have some stats here that I want to share first. I actually put together an e-guide on basically converged services and what that opportunity looks like. And one of the things that managed service providers and managed IT providers were looking for was, well, first of all, give me the idea of the market size and opportunity so I can decide if that's a big enough area to go into, and probably more importantly, how is it growing, right? And the cloud opportunity was quite interesting. The last time I checked, $272 billion opportunity, which is absolutely massive. And that the compound annual growth rate was about 24%. 24%, so double-digit growth, which will obviously continue into the future, right? So maybe what we'll do is now get you to dive in and tell us, what is this modern cloud opportunity, right? What is it for providers looking to diversify? Like, how can they actually attack this and benefit from it?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't mean to oversimplify it, but really when you define and think about what cloud is, it's not really a new technology. I would say it's more a way to deliver technology. So you think of the two broadest categories for cloud. One is software as a service, or SaaS, and that's really about changing and packaging up the way that software is delivered. Somebody else hosts it, delivered typically in a monthly payment model. And then infrastructure as a service, or IaaS. Similarly, instead of giving someone a server or data center infrastructure, you're kind of just, buying time in somebody else's data center, right? And as far as the opportunity for the channel, some people thought that cloud was going to really disintermediate the channel. I think the opposite. It's made it so much more complex that, these end clients, especially in the SMB market, they need assistance deciding what cloud solutions to use, how to migrate into the cloud. Those consulting and professional services opportunities should be monetized by channel partners and MSPs, absolutely. And then once they're onto that cloud platform, it's really a matter of kind of setup and customization of those solutions, the ongoing management and support. Because quite literally, you can't go up and hug your server anymore, right? If that client has a problem, they got to call somebody. And it just plays perfectly into the MSP's business model that typically is, first of all, already equipped to provide those wraparound services. And secondly, their businesses are typically engineered in a monthly financial model. So it's just more recurring revenue to your bottom line. So it's a great opportunity around cloud for MSPs.
Yeah, it is an interesting one. And you kind of, nailed it earlier when there was this panic of, well, is the cloud going to completely bypass the channel, right? And I certainly haven't seen that happening either. And I was listening to another speaker at one point talking about this idea that, the channel also has sideways directions, right? That it's not just about the, the hierarchy, the up and down, but it's these touch points that come in and around to be able to support those solutions. And it sounds to me like that's what you're saying. It's like, yes, you can get the thing on your own, but first of all, which thing do you get? And then secondly, the ongoing management and usefulness of that, because the only purpose I can see, you mentioned that there were 2 points. One is the infrastructure piece of it, and the other was the delivery model to make sure that that's actually accessible and usable by your business, right? So I certainly would want to tackle that on my own.
A lot of the cloud vendors or providers, however you want to label them, they operate with this assumption that they're the only thing happening for that end user's IT environment. The fact is that there's oftentimes a number of different cloud solutions that are in there. And that client really needs somebody to help aggregate the delivery and the ongoing support, of those services. So it really does take an MSP to step in and make that happen. The way that we define X as a service at D&H really is, again, it's everything as a service. So it's really taking any of the hardware components of that environment, bundling them with any of the cloud or software that the user has in their environment, and then adding in services to it, and then combine those three things into one, single payment model that they can consume easily, right? So that's what everything as a service is. And as far as what the opportunity is, if you think about if your end customer is starting to use something as a service, right? Like whether it's just the software part or just the infrastructure, why not go and change that experience as quickly as possible to make it everything as a service? Because then they become, more reliant on you, and they benefit from that true consumption model, in a service model. And oftentimes there's even tax and financial benefits in addition to the, pay as you go type of model that goes with it. So I think a lot of the savvy MSPs are starting to package up these things and really trying to give that single invoice experience each month, which is exactly what that program is.
Yeah, one of the expressions that I can remember in my early days in sort of my professional career, they always talked about one throat to choke, right? In other words, to give people fewer, vendors to work with. And I had this conversation with someone the other day about how vendor consolidation can really make a big difference, even on the customer's bottom line, right? That if they have 10 vendors that they're dealing with, that can get very tricky. That's 10 phone calls or 10 people they're looking to for support, or, this, that, and the other thing. And I think what you're saying is, correct me if I'm wrong, but that you can consolidate those things together and really have that, give the customer that peace of mind that you're the one person for the entire solution, right?
No question. And another benefit, that's obviously a great benefit to the end client you just laid out, but the benefit to the MSP also is really the stickiness and the refresh cycles. So let's just say that you put them on a 3-year contract by the time you finance it all together and work it through. And by the way, there's a lot of ways to finance. It doesn't have to be on your own dime. There's plenty of programs.
Yeah.
We have a great one. But what you really are benefiting from too is the refresh cycle. What we've seen when you look at a project-based IT deployment where like let's just say 3 years, they refresh it, partners tend to collect that refresh about 60 to 65% of the time from the stats we've seen. In this as a service model, you tend to maintain the service at about 90%. So that's about 10% attrition. And what that really does is that every 3 years, you're getting a new transaction to refresh all that hardware and all the upfront payments. The customer just keeps on going with their same monthly payment as it ever was. Very similar to what we see like in the smartphone model. So you're really turning their IT environment into the smartphone type of model, which really makes it a win-win for you and for the customer.
Yeah, you touched on something there about the complexity of the deal itself, right? Where there's mystery, there's margin. It's another expression that's used in the space quite a bit, and really that the more things that you bundle together, the harder it is for someone to unbundle. And I think that going forward, that's a good trade-off, is to be able to have that stickiness. And I had no idea that the refresh rates were that strong, right? In the 90th percentiles. That's amazing. That's a really great reason that you think people would want to do that, right? Everybody is talking about artificial intelligence and big data. A podcast that I did actually about a year ago, I got my hands on some artificial intelligence software for voice mimicry, right? So I had to record my own voice. It used machine learning to be able to understand my voice patterns and everything else. And, after a while I could then just type and it would actually figure out my, patterns, right? So this idea of machine learning, artificial intelligence, big data, it is game changing. We see examples of it, but is it practical, right? So even when I did that voice thing, or played a chess game with a computer that was actually using artificial intelligence, there wasn't any practical benefit there for me as a business owner. So do you have some ideas or advice on how providers can actually monetize on these pieces of the cloud?
Yeah, absolutely, Wes. And I think we tend to look at these big tech trends and we look at them as this holy grail to get to, and therefore we make it all complex and a lot of mystery behind it, and therefore we do nothing, right? So I think you've got to kind of chunk it down into some steps that are actionable. Let's start with with big data first. If you define big data, it's really taking a company's data, aggregating it together in a way that's accessible for everybody, and then augmenting that with third-party data in order to add more information and make better decisions, right? AI then comes in and puts some automation into some of the workflow and decision-making processes, to make things faster and less human touch. I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about here. But the fact is, when you're talking to an end customer, I mean, oftentimes they don't even have their data aggregated. So let's start with that.
Right.
How do you use an MSP? Maybe say, okay, we're going to put all your data into this, I don't know, this Dropbox platform, and we're going to build some workflows and increase accessibility. And you can get it without a VPN. You can get it on every device. So your big data now is that you actually can all see and use your data in your files. You start there, and then maybe you say, okay, you look at some of these providers that you work with, and maybe you like Dropbox or Teams, or there's a lot of different ones. They start to have different plugins for third-party providers to bring in more data and supplement it with things, right? Whether it's D&B data or some kind of industry research data or things off the internet, you can start to bring that into it by using some of these third-party plugins. So now you're getting to bigger data. And then the artificial intelligence piece comes in. Again, you can look at some third-party, plugins that are going to build some of that automation and process flow. And I think as you're taking this journey with your customers, it's important to figure out, where are your skills going to be. You really start to get better at either becoming more vertically focused or line of business focused, so you can provide advice on what is a best-in-class workflow or way to use that data. So, I think you got to continue to educate yourself around that journey. My point is, you don't have to do it all at once. You can do that over time and start to build that out and take that journey with your customer. And at each step, you're bringing in opportunities for additional services, project and ongoing support services, as well as you're introducing those additional plugins and software, there's revenue and margin to be made off of that SaaS or infrastructure vendors that you're putting in place there. So think of it as a journey that we're all going to go through a little bit over time, and just keep educating yourself.
Yeah, I am a data junkie, right? And, from my history, we've known each other for a lot of years, that I worked for companies that actually collected device and user, print level data, right? And man, like the stories that you could tell with that data, number one, and then B, the power of that data once you started amalgamating all your customers all together, right? And I can remember the first time we actually looked at different verticals. In other words, saying, okay, we've got, over 6,800 customers that are all giving us data on how they're printing, what kinds of things they're printing. What does that look like in healthcare, right? Because once you start using that data, opportunities start boiling to the surface that you probably didn't know were even there, just from the patterns of putting that data together, right? And like you said, man, you marry that with some industry data like what you were providing at D&H, get out of the way, right? Because now you've got even more power. But it is pretty simple to start, right? Just make sure you start using the data. I love that kind of approach.
Yep, we're starting to see a lot more partners. We're talking to help them build those practices, and it's a little bit of standardization. What do you compare? Start off like, I kind of made it simple, like Dropbox or Teams or SharePoint, things like that, OneDrive, whatever you want. We sit down and talk to partners about comparing and contrasting those platforms so they can start that journey. And once you do, then you start learning more about that. You learn about those plugins and processes, and we can really immerse yourself with it. So, it's a great way to approach it.
Yeah, and all these platforms that you talk about for data storage, are you seeing that becoming more standard, that organizations are starting to use things like Microsoft Storage or Google Drive or any of the other ones to actually have this infrastructure in place versus storing it in their own location?
Oh, absolutely. And, I tell you, it was already on a very fast trajectory, and you gave some of those stats. But once the pandemic hit and people had to, work from anywhere, educate from anywhere, that just skyrocketed, right? I mean, come on, how many times a day are you using Zoom or Teams or WebEx now? I mean, to the point where it's crazy. As the people return to the normalcy of the way we were, let's say, we're hearing and expecting that to actually continue, where a lot of people are talking about hybrid work, where you might work from the office a couple days and home a couple days. Now that we've kind of get into this, well, this same technology is going to be the answer. We're seeing people start to take that. Let's just say they use Teams, they start on Teams, and you're expanding that platform into their huddle rooms and video conference rooms at the office. So when you have a 10-person group, let's say, 4 at home, 6 in the office, well, it's the same platform you're on, and then you rotate that the next day. So people are really starting to, I think, get the bang for the buck out of the technology and truly adopt these platforms, and they need help. That's what we all can do as MSPs and partners here.
Yeah, it's funny, before the pandemic, I would probably do a video conference call maybe once a week, and now I would say that it's at least two to three times a day, right? And it's become part of my DNA. So it's not just for recordings like the interview we're doing today, but just how we actually communicate with people. It's almost like, you kind of look forward to actually seeing people again, right? And when I first started doing a lot of the video conferencing, people oftentimes, including myself, would even have the cameras off, right? Because you just weren't as comfortable, kind of being on camera. But now it's just become so normal, normalized, right? It's amazing. One of the other things I want to talk about, I always love to, talk about, security, right? And we've seen some big examples of things happening with infrastructure, even, right? With bad actors shutting down oil pipelines and hospitals. There was recent news in my neck of the woods in Toronto. One of our hospitals was just suffered a ransomware attack literally 2 days ago, and shut down emergency services, and they were using the emergency room to basically redirect traffic to other hospitals, right? Like, terrible stuff. So when we kind of look at the cloud, and I don't know it very well, but I feel that it's safer. I haven't heard as many stories about things coming out of cloud-based systems. Is it safer against ransomware, or is it not? Like, what's the story there for security?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, I think when people are discussing cloud and somebody's afraid of it, right, especially like an MSP or something doesn't really want their customer to go there, they throw up the security blocker right away, or someone protecting a job, let's say. But I think the reality is that, if you divide it out, let's start with cloud infrastructure services like Azure and AWS or Google Cloud Platform. I think it is safer. And the reason is that these are enterprise class security technologies that are deployed in those environments by the providers, because they know that they have to protect that. And oftentimes that same technology, it's not affordable for SMBs and mid-market size companies. So just by using those platforms and that infrastructure, you're getting a better class of security than you typically would. Where you really see the root cause for a lot of these security breakdowns actually happen more with the users and at the endpoints. So, I think you're very safe to use that infrastructure. And I think that as an MSP, you really need to spend some time helping to layer in the security practices and protocols at the endpoint. So, deploying best practices around things like multi-factor authentication and using a cloud access security broker to kind of make sure that the SaaS app in the data is proper. You're protecting your email with encryption and anti-phishing solutions. And one of the most important, it sounds so basic because it's not so technical, training.
Yeah.
You need to sit there and have a playbook to advise, technology users of the things that they need to do to protect themselves and to avoid, and all the policies. And again, all of those things, right? Obviously there's products that you can make margin from. That's great. But there's a lot of services to deploy, and training can be a very high margin service once you standardize a playbook like that. You should absolutely be doing that. And even post-sales, helping with things like compliance and audits and things to check up to see how people are doing with it. So you can develop some of that yourself. I know that at D&H, we've helped to develop some of it. And a lot of the vendor partners are really starting to get into that. I was talking to Proofpoint, for example, right? They've got a whole training thing that you can go and resell those solutions to the customers to do that. So there's great ways to handle that.
Yeah, and in the cloud, I'd always assume that at least there was some backup and redundancy, right? That if you're hosting your stuff in the cloud, it's not actually sitting in one location, that there probably is some kind of mirrored distribution, right? And at one point in my career, I actually did sell storage arrays. So I don't know if you remember sort of IBM Shark storage. And then of course, when NetApp came in with more of their network attached storage, and this idea of RAID and mirroring and things like that, it is very complicated. I think it's still very complicated, but in those cloud infrastructure providers, they're already doing that. And I got to guess, Jason, that they have teams of security specialists that are larger than our companies will ever be, right? Just the security specialists alone. We're at that point in the interview now, is if you just had one piece of advice for MSPs and managed technology providers that are looking to find some opportunity in the cloud in their businesses, what would that be?
I only get one, huh?
That's it.
I have an answer for you, West. I think the one piece of advice I would give is to tell MSPs to get more involved in business applications. I think that's what we're seeing is what the next mile is, and where that the savvy MSPs will go to. And And here's why, a lot of MSPs and channel partners are just very focused on infrastructure. They're really good at designing and managing and supporting, servers and storage and network and all of that. And that's all well and good, but think about it. As things move more eventually to software as a service, right? You're not touching any of that infrastructure. That's up to the SaaS provider that's hosting that. So you're no longer adding value there. You think about the network, right? I believe that as 5G becomes more pervasive, that why would you have a network in your business? If you're starting up a business today, you're like, look, I'm going to get you a notebook that's going to connect to 5G, and here we go.
Right.
So now you lost the network. What do you got left? You've got the devices, but I think on top of that is you being able to consult and customize and implement, business applications. And that's going to force MSPs to get a bit more specialized in vertical markets, to be good at that and understand that that vertical space. And I think that also line of business, right? Understanding, maybe you can specialize around, HR applications or sales applications or, operational ones. If you could start to do that and start to wrap your services around, that endpoint device and how you access it, and then the applications themselves for support, you're going to really build a winning strategy, I think, that's future-proof.
Well, I really appreciate that one piece of advice. It was a good one. And certainly if they want to get in touch with you to learn, we can't obviously talk about the entire cloud opportunity here in the short time that we have together. How can they get in touch with you and learn more about how they can take advantage of those cloud opportunities?
Yeah, I would love nothing more to talk to some of the MSPs that they're working with you, West. And, my email is jbystrak, JBYSTRAK, @dandh.com. Or you can go to www.dandh.com/cloud. You'll find a lot of information and resources and contact information for the D&H crew.